The Dragon Palace stood high above the city. Its walls were made of black stone and shining crystal, guarded by warriors with golden armor. Every creature who walked inside the palace felt small before its power. The palace was a place of pride, where kings, princes, and generals lived like gods. But hidden among them was a man no one noticed. His name was Ethan. He was a human. And he was only a cleaner. Ethan moved silently through the palace halls with a broom in his hand and a cloth tied to his belt. Every day he swept the marble floors, polished the walls, and cleaned the royal chambers. He walked past warriors who never looked at him. He passed nobles who turned away as if he were invisible. To them, he was just a shadow. To them, he was nothing more than dust man. Ethan never spoke back. He kept his head down and worked. But while his hands cleaned the dirt, his ears and eyes were always open. He listened when people talked, even when they thought no one was near. He saw things others ignored, because no one bothered to hide secrets from a man they did not respect. One night, the palace was quieter than usual. The torches burned low, and the guards were lazy in their watch. Ethan was cleaning the Great Hall, a place where the Dragon King held his councils and feasts. The hall was huge, with high pillars carved into the shape of dragons. Golden fire lamps lit the walls, and the smell of incense floated in the air. Ethan pushed his broom slowly, his footsteps echoing across the empty floor. He was alone. Or so he thought. A faint whisper reached his ears. Two voices, hidden behind a pillar. The prince must die before dawn. Ethan froze. His hand gripped the broom tighter. The voices were rough, not the kind of speech used by nobles. They spoke in low tones, thinking no one was near. Ethan dared to move closer, his steps soft, like a cat moving in the dark. The guards protect the king, but the prince is careless. He will be easy prey. Strike during the feast tomorrow. A knife in the shadows, and the Dragon Empire will bleed. Ethan's heart beat fast. His mouth went dry. He wanted to step back, but his foot slipped slightly on the polished stone. The sound was small, but enough. The whispers stopped. Silence. Then, quick footsteps, fading into the night. Ethan stood frozen in the empty hall. His chest rose and fell. He looked left and right, but no one remained. Only the echo of danger filled the air. He knew what he had heard. Someone wanted to kill the Dragon Prince. But what could he do? Who would listen to a human cleaner? If he went to the guards, they would laugh at him. If he spoke to a noble, they would scold him for wasting their time. Ethan walked slowly back to his corner. His broom felt heavier than ever before. In his mind, a battle began. Should he stay silent and safe? Or should he risk everything to warn the prince? That night, Ethan could not sleep. He lay on the thin mat in his small servant room, staring at the cracked ceiling. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the whisper again, "The prince must die before dawn." The next morning, the palace was alive with activity. Servants rushed through halls, guards stood tall, and nobles gathered for the great feast. The Dragon Prince himself appeared in the courtyard, dressed in shining armor of silver and blue. Ethan saw him for the first time clearly. The prince was young, tall, and proud. His eyes carried arrogance, the kind of pride born from power. But behind those sharp eyes, Ethan noticed something else, kindness, hidden, perhaps forgotten. For a moment, Ethan thought of the whispers. He wondered, how long will those eyes stay bright if death is already hunting him? As the day passed, Ethan continued his work. He scrubbed, polished, and swept as always. But his mind was restless. He noticed shadows moving in corners where they should not be. He saw strange faces among the palace servants. Perhaps he imagined it, or perhaps danger had already entered the heart of the palace. By nightfall, Ethan was certain. The prince was not safe. He stood once again in the great hall, the same place where he had heard the deadly whispers. The feast was only hours away. The palace glittered with light, and music echoed across the walls. Everyone's attention was on the king, the nobles, the warriors. But no one was watching the shadows. No one but Ethan. As he cleaned the last corner of the hall, Ethan felt it again, that same cold presence from the night before. He saw movement in the dark corridor, too fast, too careful. A shadow slipped through the wall like smoke. Ethan's breath caught. His hands shook, but he tightened his grip on the broom. His heart told him what his mind feared. The assassins were already inside. And tomorrow, when the feast began, the Dragon Prince would be their prey. Ethan stood in silence, his shadow long against the golden walls. No one would believe him. No one would care. But in that moment, Ethan understood something. If he did nothing, the prince would die. And if the prince died, the Dragon Empire would fall into chaos. He was only a cleaner. A human, forgotten by all. Yet the life of the Dragon Prince now rested in his hands. The night after Ethan heard the whispers, the palace looked peaceful. Torches burned bright, guards walked their rounds, and music from the royal chambers filled the air. To everyone else, it was a normal evening. But to Ethan, every shadow felt dangerous. Every corner seemed to hide death. He moved through the long hallways with his broom and cloth, his eyes sharp, his ears waiting. He was a cleaner, yes, but tonight he felt like a hunter searching for signs no one else cared to see. All around him, the Dragon Palace glittered with wealth. Red banners hung from tall pillars, golden lamps shined against the black stone walls, and noble voices echoed proudly. But Ethan could not enjoy the beauty. The only words he heard in his mind were the whispers from last night. The prince must die before dawn. He wanted to run to the guards, to shout the truth. But he knew what would happen. If he spoke, they would laugh. If he insisted, they would call him a liar. To them, he was only a human. Only a cleaner. His word was worthless. So he stayed silent. Yet as he swept the floor near the royal garden, he suddenly stopped. The Dragon Prince was there. He was practicing sword moves alone, his silver armor shining under the moonlight. His hair was dark, his eyes sharp, and his movements fast. He cut the air with power, his blade singing as it moved. Ethan had seen many warriors, but none carried themselves with such natural strength. Still, the prince was young, and his pride was heavy. He fought the air as if it were already defeated. He laughed as if no danger could ever touch him. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He wanted to speak. He wanted to warn him. But his tongue felt heavy. The prince finally noticed him. He lowered his blade and frowned. "You there, human," he said, his voice strong. "Why do you stare? Did dust become more important than your work?" Ethan quickly bowed his head. "My apologies, my prince. I was only cleaning the path." The prince studied him for a moment. His eyes softened, but only slightly. "You are a strange one," he said. "Most servants run when they see me. But you watch." Ethan swallowed hard. Should he speak? Should he say the words? His heart raced. But fear chained his voice. He only nodded and lowered his eyes again. The prince smirked and raised his sword once more. "Do not waste your life staring, cleaner. Dust waits for no man." With that, he returned to his practice, and Ethan stepped back into the shadows. His chance to warn him had slipped away. That night, Ethan returned to his small servant's room. He sat on the edge of his thin bed, his hands pressed to his face. Why had he stayed silent? Why did fear control him? He told himself it was not his duty. He was only a cleaner. The life of a prince was guarded by soldiers, not by him. But deep inside, he knew the truth. No one else had heard the whispers. No one else had seen the shadows moving through the halls. If he stayed silent, no one would protect the prince. Sleep did not come to him. Hours passed like years. And when the first light of dawn touched the palace, Ethan's eyes were still open. The day of the great feast arrived. The Dragon Palace was alive with excitement. Servants carried trays of golden cups and silver dishes. Musicians prepared their instruments. Guards polished their weapons and stood tall at every door. The nobles dressed in their finest robes, ready to celebrate. And in the middle of it all, the Dragon Prince walked proudly, smiling at his people. He looked untouchable and safe. But Ethan knew the truth. The feast was the perfect trap. As the sun fell and torches lit the great hall, Ethan found himself cleaning near the feast tables. He moved quietly, sweeping and wiping, but his eyes never left the crowd. He noticed every face, every shadow, every movement. Then he saw it. A servant he had never seen before moved quickly through the tables. His eyes were sharp, his hands too careful. He carried a jug of wine, but his steps were too fast, too silent. Ethan's heart jumped. Was this the assassin? He dropped his broom and followed, keeping his head low. The stranger walked closer to the prince's seat. Closer, closer. But before Ethan could act, the stranger suddenly turned and vanished into another corridor. Gone. Ethan stood frozen, his breath short. Was he wrong? Or was the assassin testing the path? He did not know. But one thing was clear, The danger was real, and the time was running short. He had failed to warn the guards. He had failed to warn the prince. Now the assassins were inside. The feast had only begun, but the shadow of death already walked between the tables. Ethan clenched his fists. His silence had gone on too long. The prince's life was hanging on a thin thread, and only he knew it. And soon, the thread would break. The great feast had begun. The dragon palace glowed with light. Golden fire lamps burned on every wall, filling the hall with warmth. Long tables overflowed with roasted meat, sweet fruits, and shining cups of wine. Music from horns and drums echoed loudly. Nobles laughed, warriors boasted, and servants rushed with trays. All eyes were on the king, sitting on his throne with his crown of fire. Beside him, proud and smiling, was the dragon prince. He looked fearless, as if nothing in the world could harm him. But Ethan's eyes never left him. From his place near the back of the hall, broom in hand, Ethan watched the crowd with sharp focus. His heart pounded with every sound, every movement. He remembered the whisper, "The prince must die before dawn." And now, dawn was only hours away. The music grew louder. The nobles raised their cups high. The feast was alive with joy. But Ethan saw the cracks. He noticed a guard at the far door standing too stiff, his eyes not on the king but on the prince. He noticed a servant carrying food with a hand that trembled, not from weakness but from hidden tension. And then it happened. The hall doors burst open. For a heartbeat, the music stopped. Then came screams. Shadows poured inside like a flood, men in black armor, their faces hidden, their blades sharp. Assassins. The guards near the throne drew their swords. The hall erupted into chaos. Tables crashed, food spilled, nobles shouted, and warriors charged. But Ethan's eyes went straight to the prince. The king was surrounded by loyal guards, their shields forming a wall around him. But the prince, sitting at his side, was left exposed. His young pride had kept him far from the soldiers. He grabbed for his sword, but 3 assassins rushed toward him with blades ready. "Protect the prince!" a general shouted, but the guards were too far. Ethan's breath caught. His body moved before his mind could think. He threw down his broom and ran. The assassins raised their blades. The prince stepped back, his eyes wide for the first time. He was fast, yes, but the assassins were trained to kill. Ethan grabbed the first thing he could reach, a serving tray left on the floor. With all his strength, he swung it. Clang! The metal tray struck one assassin's head, sending him crashing into a table. The second assassin turned in shock, not expecting danger from a human cleaner. Ethan shoved the tray into his chest, knocking him off balance. "Run!" Ethan shouted at the prince. The prince hesitated. For a moment, pride held him still. Then another blade cut the air near his face, and reality struck. He turned and ran toward the side of the hall. Ethan followed, grabbing the prince's arm. He knew the palace better than any noble, better even than most guards. He knew the hidden paths, the servant tunnels, the forgotten doors. The assassins shouted and gave chase. Through the noise of the feast, through the clash of swords and screams of nobles, Ethan dragged the prince into a narrow servant's passage behind the wall. It was dark, lit only by a single torch. The air smelled of dust and old stone. "Unhand me!" the prince snapped, pulling free for a moment. His eyes burned with pride. "I am no coward. I will fight." Ethan turned to him, his chest heaving. "If you fight, you die. You are not guarded. They want you. If you fall, the Empire falls with you." The prince stared at him, breathing hard. For the first time, he saw not a cleaner but a man who spoke with fire in his voice. Before he could reply, footsteps echoed behind them. The assassins were already in the tunnel. "Move!" Ethan shouted. He pushed the prince forward and ran with him into the twisting dark. The passage was narrow and winding. Ethan knew every turn. He had cleaned these paths for years, ignored by all, but tonight his knowledge was their only hope. He guided the prince left, then right, then down a set of crumbling stairs. Behind them, steel scraped against stone. The assassins were close. The prince stumbled, his armor heavy. Ethan pulled him up. "Faster! Do not stop!" They burst into another hall, smaller and colder. The prince gasped for air. His pride was broken for the first time. His life now rested in the hands of a human cleaner. "Why are you helping me?" the prince asked, his voice low. Ethan did not slow. "Because no one else saw what I saw." And no one else would believe me. The prince's eyes widened. You knew. I heard them, Ethan said. I heard their plan. And now they are here. Before more could be said, a blade struck the wall beside them. Sparks flew. An assassin leapt forward from the shadows. Ethan shoved the prince aside and swung his torch into the attacker's face. Flames burst, the assassin screamed, and Ethan dragged the prince down another path. Their escape was not victory. The palace was full of shadows. The assassins were not strangers to these halls. But Ethan knew something they did not. He knew the hidden ways. He knew the forgotten doors. And tonight, those secrets were the only reason the Dragon Prince still breathed. The sound of footsteps grew louder behind them. More shadows followed. Ethan and the prince ran deeper into the palace's bones, into tunnels where no noble had ever walked. The feast was far behind them now. The king was safe, guarded by soldiers. But the prince's life rested in the hands of a human cleaner. The palace above was filled with chaos. Swords clashed, nobles screamed, and fire spread from broken lamps. But deep below, in the dark servant tunnels, the Real chase began. Ethan ran through the narrow corridors, the Dragon Prince at his side. Their footsteps echoed on stone. Behind them came the hunters, silent, deadly, never giving up. The prince's breath was heavy. His silver armor slowed him down, and sweat rolled down his face. He was a warrior, yes, but not trained for fear. Not trained for shadows that stalked unseen. How do they know these tunnels? The prince whispered, his voice sharp with panic. They do not, Ethan said, pulling him forward. But they follow sound. They follow us. The prince frowned, unused to being commanded by a human. But he said nothing. He could see the truth in Ethan's eyes. They reached a fork in the path. One tunnel went left, sloping downward into darkness. The other went right, climbing upward toward faint light. Which way? The prince asked. Ethan did not hesitate. Down. The prince's jaw tightened. That leads to the old storage halls. Dead ends. Not for me, Ethan said. I know the way. They ran down the left tunnel. Dust filled the air, and the stones were damp with age. Few ever came this way. Behind them, the sound of chasing footsteps grew louder. Ethan stopped suddenly. He pressed his hand to the wall, then pulled a loose stone aside. Hidden behind it was a narrow hole, barely wide enough for a man to crawl. This way, Ethan whispered. The prince looked at the hole in disbelief. That is no path. That is a grave. Ethan gave him a sharp look. Would you rather meet death in the open? For a moment, pride held the prince still. Then the sound of steel scraping closer made the choice for him. He dropped to his knees and crawled through the dark hole. Ethan followed, pushing the stone back in place behind them. Inside, the space was tight and suffocating. The air smelled of earth and rot. Rats scurried past. But Ethan knew this hidden crawl path. It connected to another hall, far from where the assassin searched. The prince coughed, his voice low. How do you know this? I have cleaned these places for years, Ethan said. No one sees the cleaner, but the cleaner sees everything. The prince was silent. For the first time, he understood how much this human knew. They crawled until their knees ached, then finally reached another opening. Ethan pushed it aside, and cool air touched their faces. They stepped into a long hall, filled with broken crates and rusted chains. The prince drew his sword, his eyes scanning the shadows. We cannot keep running. Ethan shook his head. We must. They outnumber us. The prince gritted his teeth. I am no coward. And I am no warrior, Ethan said firmly. Yet here we are, alive. Because we run. The prince's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Suddenly, clang! A blade struck from the darkness. An assassin leapt from behind a pile of crates. The prince raised his sword to block, but the force knocked him back. Another assassin stepped forward, eyes burning. The prince dies tonight. Ethan grabbed a chain from the ground and swung it with all his strength. It struck the assassin's arm, knocking the blade aside. The prince recovered quickly and slashed his sword, cutting the attacker down. But more shadows appeared in the hall. 4 assassins, maybe more. Their blades gleamed in the dim light. We cannot fight them all, Ethan whispered. The prince's face was pale but determined. Then what do we do? Ethan's mind raced. He looked at the crates, the chains, the high ceiling. An idea formed. Follow me. He ran toward the far end of the hall. The assassins charged after them. Ethan grabbed a loose rope tied to a stack of crates and pulled hard. The crates toppled, crashing to the floor with thunder. Dust filled the air. "Now!" Ethan shouted. He pulled the prince through a side door hidden behind the fallen wood. They slipped into another narrow passage, closing the door behind them. The assassins roared in anger, trapped for the moment. The prince stared at Ethan in disbelief. "You think like a soldier." "No, like a general." Ethan shook his head. "No. I think like a man who has cleaned every corner of this palace and learned how to survive its dangers." The prince was silent again. Respect began to grow in his eyes, though his pride still fought against it. They moved deeper into the passage. The air grew colder, the stones older. Ethan knew where they were going now. "The old servant halls," Ethan whispered. "Few know them. We will be safe there." The prince nodded slowly. But then his voice dropped, almost thoughtful. "Why risk yourself for me, human? They do not value you. You could have hidden and lived." Ethan looked at him, his face calm. "Because if you fall, this empire falls. And even a cleaner must live in the ruins." The prince stared at him, his pride breaking further. Before he could answer, another sound reached their ears. Footsteps. But slower. Heavier. Someone was waiting ahead. Ethan froze. His eyes narrowed. He recognized that sound. Not an assassin. Not a stranger. It was the step of a palace guard. And suddenly, his heart went cold. If the assassins had friends inside the palace, then betrayal had already begun. The footsteps echoed through the narrow passage, steady and heavy. Ethan's body tensed. The prince raised his sword, his eyes burning with both fear and pride. From the shadows ahead, a figure appeared. The torchlight revealed a palace guard. His armor was dark red, the mark of loyalty to the royal family. "Finally," the prince said with relief. "One of my father's guards. We are safe." But Ethan's eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. The guard walked forward too calmly. His hand rested lightly on his sword, not with the tension of a man ready to defend, but with the patience of a hunter waiting for his prey. "My prince," the guard said smoothly, bowing his head. "We have been searching for you." Ethan stepped slightly in front of the prince, his instinct screaming. "Stay back," he warned. The guard's eyes flickered to Ethan, cold and sharp. Strange. A human cleaner giving orders in the presence of royalty. The prince frowned. "He has saved my life twice already. Watch your tongue." The guard smirked, though he bowed again. "Of course, my prince. Forgive me." But Ethan heard the false note in his voice. He had heard many nobles and guards speak to him with scorn, but this was different. This voice carried something darker, mockery. The prince stepped forward. "Lead us back to the throne room. My father must know." The guard's sword flashed suddenly. Steel cut the air. The prince barely managed to block the strike. The impact rang through the hall. His eyes widened in shock. "You," he whispered. The guard's smile was cruel. "Forgive me, my prince. Tonight, loyalty belongs to another master." Ethan grabbed the prince's arm and pulled him back. "I knew it. Betrayal." The guard advanced, his steps slow, confident. "Do you really think the assassins entered the palace alone?" "No. We opened the gates for them. We let them in." The prince's voice shook with anger. "Traitor! You swore an oath." "Oaths mean nothing when power changes hands," the guard said coldly. His sword gleamed in the dim light. "Your death will bring a new order." The prince raised his weapon, but Ethan could see the hesitation in his eyes. Fighting a trained palace guard was not the same as fighting a nameless assassin. This was a man he once trusted. The guard lunged. Steel clashed with steel, sparks flying. The prince fought with skill, but the betrayal shook him. His strikes lacked focus. Ethan grabbed a broken piece of wood from the ground, swinging it at the guard's back. The blow was weak compared to steel, but enough to distract. "Move!" Ethan shouted. The prince pushed forward, driving the guard back a step. They both ran deeper into the passage. But the guard laughed, his voice echoing. "You cannot run forever. These halls are mine as much as yours." They reached an old storage hall filled with barrels and ropes. Ethan's mind raced. He had worked here many times. He knew its secrets. The guard appeared at the door, sword raised. Cornered. The prince lifted his blade, but Ethan stepped in front. "No. I'll handle this." The prince stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot fight him. He is trained. You are." "A cleaner," Ethan finished. "Yes. But this is my palace too. And I know how to fight in my own way." The guard laughed. "A broom against steel. Fool." Ethan's eyes hardened. "Not a broom. A mind." He grabbed a rope tied to the ceiling and yanked it free. Barrels toppled from above, crashing down toward the guard. The man rolled aside, but the distraction gave Ethan his chance. "Now, my prince." The prince charged. His sword struck with fury this time, fueled by anger at betrayal. Their blades clashed again and again, until at last the prince drove the guard backward into the fallen barrels. The traitor stumbled. Ethan rushed forward, shoving another heavy crate over him. The guard fell, pinned beneath the weight. His sword clattered to the ground. Breathing hard, the prince pointed his blade at the man's throat. His hand shook, torn between rage and sorrow. "You were sworn to protect me," the prince said. His voice cracked. "And yet you tried to kill me." The guard spat, his eyes burning with hate. "You are young, arrogant, blind. The Empire will fall under your rule. Your death will save us all." Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. "No. Killing the prince will only burn this empire to ashes. You chose the wrong side." The prince's blade trembled. He could strike, end it now. But his hand froze. Killing a man he once trusted was harder than any battle. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Leave him. He is trapped. We cannot waste time. Others are coming." The prince hesitated, then slowly lowered his sword. He turned his back on the traitor, though the pain in his eyes remained. Together, he and Ethan slipped out through another hidden door. Their footsteps faded into the darkness. Behind them, the guard laughed weakly, even under the weight of the crates. His voice carried one last warning. "You may escape me, but you cannot escape the truth. The palace is full of traitors. You are already surrounded." The words echoed in Ethan's mind as they disappeared into the night. The prince was alive, but trust was broken. And for the first time, the prince looked at Ethan not with pride, not with arrogance, but with respect. Because a human cleaner had saved him again. The night seemed endless. Ethan and the Dragon Prince moved through the last of the hidden servant halls, their footsteps slow, heavy, and tired. The air smelled of damp stone and dust. Every shadow felt dangerous, every sound seemed like the whisper of death. But after hours of running, the noise of battle above began to fade. The assassins were either defeated by the king's warriors or lost in the maze of the palace. For the first time since the feast began, silence returned. The prince leaned against the wall, his silver armor scratched and dented. Sweat covered his face, but his eyes still burned with fire. He looked at Ethan, the human who had guided him through darkness. "You saved me," the prince said quietly. His voice was not proud now. It carried weight, respect, and something deeper. Ethan shook his head. "No. I only did what no one else could. I cleaned these halls for years. I knew the paths. That is all." The prince studied him for a long moment. "And yet, without you, I would be dead." Before Ethan could reply, distant horns echoed from above. Victory horns. The assassins were finished. The palace had survived the night. Ethan and the prince climbed up a hidden stairway and emerged into the great courtyard. The sky was pale with the first light of dawn. Smoke rose from the palace, broken tables lay scattered, and blood stained the stone floors. The Dragon King stood at the center, surrounded by generals and guards. His crown of fire glowed faintly in the weak morning sun. His eyes turned to the prince, and widened when he saw the human standing at his side. "My son!" the king roared, rushing forward. He embraced the prince, his voice thick with relief. "I feared you were lost." "I lived," the prince said, pulling back. His eyes turned toward Ethan. "Because of him." The courtyard went silent. Every noble, every guard, every servant turned their eyes to Ethan. A human. A cleaner. His clothes were torn, his hands dirty, his face pale. The generals frowned. Whispers filled the air. A human. A cleaner. Impossible. The king's gaze hardened. "What do you mean?" The prince raised his voice so all could hear. "When the assassins came, it was this man who saved me. He led me through paths no warrior knew. He fought when no one else could. He risked his life for mine. The silence deepened. The nobles shifted uncomfortably. Guards exchanged uncertain glances. For them, humans were weak, useless, unworthy of honor. Yet here stood the prince, declaring his life had been saved by one. The king's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer to Ethan, studying him like a hawk studies its prey. "You, a cleaner. Is this true?" Ethan bowed his head. "I only did what I could, my king. Nothing more." The king's voice was heavy. "You speak with humility. But my son's words are not spoken lightly." The prince's voice rang out, firm and proud. "Father, I live because of him. If not for this human, your heir would lie dead before you." The crowd stirred again. The weight of those words could not be ignored. For a long moment, the king was silent. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Then it seems we owe our future to one we once ignored." The prince turned to Ethan, his eyes steady. "From this day, you are not just a cleaner. You are the man who saved the Dragon Prince." Gasps filled the courtyard. Some nobles looked angry, others shocked. But none could deny the truth. Ethan bowed deeply, though his heart raced. He had never wanted glory. He had only wanted to do what was right. But as he lifted his head, he saw something in the prince's eyes, a promise. The prince raised his voice once more. "Hear me, all of you. From this day forward, humans are not to be ignored. They will no longer live in the shadows of this palace. They will stand with us, as allies, as protectors, as people of worth." The courtyard shook with shock. Some cheered. Some muttered in anger. But none could deny that the words of the prince carried the weight of destiny. Ethan felt the world shift around him. He had been invisible all his life. A shadow with a broom. But now the empire itself had seen him. The king raised his hand. "So it shall be. My son's life is proof enough. The human has changed everything." As the dawn rose higher, Ethan stood quietly at the prince's side. He felt no pride, only a deep unease. For though the assassins were defeated, he knew the truth behind the guard's last words. The palace is full of traitors. This was not the end. It was only the beginning of something far greater, far darker. But for now, Ethan was no longer forgotten. He was the cleaner who saved a prince. And that one act had changed the fate of an empire.